Are you tired of being stuck in mount? We got to focus on not panicking and utilizing these 4 tools that can be utilized in a lot of different scenarios, including somebody trying to control you, somebody trying to submit you, somebody striking, or somebody trying to smother you. Check out these tools and let us know what you think. So when we're looking at the full mount position, we want to understand that that's a dominant position for the person on top, right? And there are stages of full mount that go from bad to even worse, right? You can classify it in low mount, medium mount, and high mount. Today, we're talking about 4 different tools that we can utilize to build an effective escape strategy and mount. And so understanding that position for the person on bottom is important. Understanding how we can establish our frames, how we're going to use our hips and our legs, our strongest asset, to remain in an unstable environment. And we're going to go through different positions, different strategies and scenarios, including if you have a striking opponent. So let's look at the first position of full mount, right? Typically, the person is passing the guard and they're looking at sitting, right? So as a guard player, I've started to fail in my goal of keeping my knees in between my partner, right? I want to make sure that I'm keeping my hands up. My hands and my elbows are going to be my last line of defense, essentially, right? Once they get past the mount. What I don't want to do is have my frames get collapsed, meaning my partner pushing my wrist to my chest. And I definitely don't want them to get split in a scenario like this. So early defense is always going to be best. If you find yourself that they are grabbing onto that wrist, right? We want to be ready for a strong bridge. I got to remain in an unstable environment here. If I'm not moving or if I'm not moving effectively, it's really easy for the person to control me. So first, we're making sure we're getting that good bridge. Turn this way for me. A good bridge is going to mean my feet are nice and flat. My knees are open because my hips are a platform. I'm raising that person all the way up until I get them off balance enough to get their hands to the mat. As soon as I do that, I'm bringing my hips down and I want to be shooting my hands through right here. There's a lot of ways we can control this arm. Just focus on 2-on-1 control. My favorite way is coming through with a gable grip right over that elbow so that I can pull that elbow nice and close to my chest. I got to think about my opponent in terms of being a table right now. He has 4 legs, 1, 2, 3, 4. If I take away 2 legs of that table, this is the direction that I want to go. Ensure that we're looking where we want to go. So I'm looking to put my partner over there. And one more big, powerful bridge. So my feet need to be flat. My knees need to be open so I can lift them all the way up and over again with my focus of getting to that top position. So let's look again. Common mistakes we see with bridging in the beginning is people will slip. That structure will kind of fail, and it makes it really difficult to bridge when I only have 1 leg, right? It's always best to think 2 is going to be better than 1. So if you have that person, they're controlling your wrist, they're pushing down, right? They're trying to collapse those frames. We can use these hips and even direct them with my hands. My goal is to get their hands to the mat, off balance them, so I can trap the arm, trap the leg. Nice big bridge to come up on top. Now, continuing that idea of an unstable environment, I see this with the kids too, and this could be a common, even a self-defense scenario, right? You find yourself with your hands split to the mat right here. So an individual is just looking at controlling you, right? Randy's base is a little bit better here, so it may be hard for me to bridge and get him to post. What we can think about doing, right, is lifting our partner up, raising their center of gravity, and it can be a lot easier. This is a weaker plane for that person to go through, right? So I need to be focused on trying to bridge and almost like I'm going to be snapping my hands to my side, right? My partner doesn't want to face plant with me, so that's a good way to generate that ability for them to get their hands to the mat, right? As I drop my hips down, we know that he's going to return back to this position, so that's the opportunity to anticipate that, trap the arm, trap the leg, really powerful bridge to get to that top position. That's going to be important. Those are against non-striking opponents right there. So a third scenario that we can be discussing is if you have somebody in that full mount position. Now, if I'm dealing with those strikes, I am going to be bringing my hands up to protect my face. That way I don't take any shots unnecessarily. But as I see that person posturing up really high and releasing control to strike, I got to be thinking about trying to use my hips to bump them, or even once I get that good bump, making sure I hug him nice and tight. And you see how I'm hanging on him. Can you get your hands off the mat very easily?
No.
So that's the goal, is to make sure that I can hug them long enough so that way their damage isn't increased. As soon as I feel the timing is right, trapping the arm, I can do a traditional overhook. If you're drilling this with partners, make sure your partner is always cupping your shoulder so that way you guys don't accidentally wrist lock each other. You can see if Randy puts his hand back on the mat right there and I start to bridge, he could accidentally wrist lock himself. So that's just a little tip when you're working on dealing with traditional overhooks for this clamp, right? I can also be thinking about trapping the leg. Now, if you're having a little bit of trouble, it's always important to remember that we have a free appendage over here too. So if you want to generate just a little bit more force and push, I can get my overhook. I can use my hips too, and I can almost be kind of punching and hitting my partner to be able to give a little extra pop on that clamp and bridge. So those are 3 opportunities for us to use our hips and focus on trapping appendages to reverse the opponent. We had a traditional clamp and bridge. You know, if they're starting to try and control your wrists, we want to make sure we're getting their hands to the mat. And then if our hands were pinned by our sides, making sure we're creating a really unstable environment, thinking about simultaneously bridging the hips and snapping your hands to your side, because the main goal is to get those hands on the mat first, so that way it makes it a whole lot easier for us to capture. When you're dealing with striking opponents, make sure you're closing the distance, right? Getting that good hug to your partner's torso makes it a lot more difficult for them to generate power and be able to have a lot of strength and pop in those strikes. While we're in that low to maybe even medium mount position, we talked about having the ability for us to bridge. That keeps us as an unstable environment, possibly with the goal of getting our opponent's hands on the mat, but it's also creating space between the mat, right, and my opponent. So we want to be able to make sure that we are manipulating and moving our body in that space to help us get back to our guard position. Option 1, we want to get up on top. If we're in a self-defense scenario, we're trying to get away. If we're in a sport scenario, we're now going on the offensive and trying to pass the guard to make up the point differential. But regardless of the scenario you're in, you use your bridges to help create space. If the reversals fail because your opponent is opening up, we need to be ready to take advantage of that and utilize that to get to our side, to start creating more space, and hopefully get back to guard. So checking this out, right? If Randy has just about passed my guard, right? He's stepping over into that full mount position, remembering that I'm trying to keep him in this low to medium mount position. One of my early ways that I can do that is making sure that I'm bumping and getting to my side right here. But if you look at my shoulders, turn this way for me. If you look at my shoulders in the mat, right, I want them to be about 45. We don't want to over bridge here and let them get behind the elbow, because now they're going to be focusing on taking their back. So these angles are important, right? I want to keep my partner square to me right now because he got to a strong position. I don't want to give him the next strong position by inadvertently bridging too much or turning too hard. So as we're keeping these frames, you see how I can start sneaking my elbows in, right? This is a wedge. We need to think about how we can use our body parts. Our knees are great wedges. Our elbows are great wedges. So when I'm using my feet right here for little bumps and turning to my side, now that I have this wedge in here and it's a frame, it's a lot easier for me to start hip escaping out, and I'm moving his legs away from me. So if I move my chest away, you see this is that little bit of space that I'm creating. I'm not bench pressing him away from me. My arms aren't strong enough to do that. But what I am doing is keeping that. As I hip escape away, my frame is increasing in length until I can get a bottom knee out. Once I get that bottom knee out, I'm focused on turning because their space is continuing to get taken away. So I'm keeping my hands out there, framing. So I'm in my half guard position. Turning this way a little bit. My next challenge here, right, is I want to get back to my full guard position. So as my hips are turning, my chest is turning, my hands are coming with me, denying that chest-to-chest connection, moving my chest away. Now I have that space to take this leg out, right, and replace my guard. If you're dealing with a very aggressive partner and they're really pushing in and your foot is getting stuck, right, I like to think about getting this leg out in terms of a clock. Right now, my foot is at about that 6 o'clock position. Once my knee is out, we're starting to turn, continue to turn, and you'll have that foot start popping out to about the 3 o'clock position. If it was on the other side, it'd be 6 and 9 respectively. Okay, So partners coming over into that full mount position, right? This is a great time to start hip escaping before they get stable, right? I need to be watching that knee. If I wait until this knee gets really heavy, it can get difficult. So a good way to drill this is when a partner's, say, a prepare to mount position, right? And trying to step over into that full mount position. As soon as they do, I'm establishing those frames and hip escaping out. Once that knee can come out, we can establish our half guard first. I have really good frames. I pull my right knee out, continuing to turn my hips so that way my other foot can pop out and we can start focusing on establishing our guard. Now, when you're escaping these bad positions, the first escape is not always going to work, right? Your first clamp and bridge might not work. Your hip escape might not work, but it's important as the skill level of your opponents increases, we need to be able to start comboing these together. So using those bridges with the effort of creating space to help us take advantage of that with our shrimping. One thing to think about here is your bridges are a finite resource. So if my partner's in mount, right, we have to be kind of strategic. That means you got to kind of wait a little bit with them too, right? And timing their movement, right? If I'm just thrashing around, I'm being irresponsible with my energy, I'm going to tire out very, very fast. So we just got to stay focused on our tools that we're going to use. Now, if I have someone that's trying to settle down and they're getting heavy right here, go ahead and start controlling with your hands and even dropping the chest a little bit. Those big bridges, right? Remember, I was trying to reverse them, but if he opens everything up right here, turn a little bit. If he opens everything up to post, right, watch as I drop my hips. As I drop my hips, that's that space that I need. So don't drop your hips and allow your partner to settle back down. It can be so much harder to build that momentum again. Ensure that you take advantage of all that space you just created. So partner's heavy, my feet are flat, big bridge, he opens up, and immediately I'm going back into that little ball. I'm bringing my elbows in as wedges. I'm bringing my knees in as wedges too. Now with my field limit, I can continue to create my space, keep them at the end of my frames, and be able to close the guard. So being strategic with those bridges are going to be important. We're creating space. If we don't get the reversal, take advantage of that space and start hip escaping out to get back to our guard. Another tool that we have that we can utilize to remain in an unstable environment while in that bottom full mount position is the use of kipping. So we're going to talk about if your opponent is first using their legs as hooks, that degrades the efficiency of our bridge. And we'll show you how when their partner is sucking their hips to you, we're going to deal with, stripping those hooks. But what happens if you can't get those hooks out, and how we can use kipping to remain unstable and help us get to what's called a single leg X position. If you are just learning jiu-jitsu, it's best to focus on, the ability for your standard bridge and understand the concepts of clamp and bridge and how to, use your bridging and your shrimping together. Once you have a good understanding and you can practice and you can efficiently escape mount from that, think about adding kipping to that afterwards, right? We want to build those core skills of unstable environment because kipping can be a little bit more intermediate to advanced, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be aware of it and try to work that into our game, right? So with kipping, or even before that, when I'm in full mount, you can see how people can be lowering their base, right? And their goal can be to use their heels, and go ahead and lift your heels up too, like their heels come up off the ground, and so do the knees. Yeah, see how that starts to pick my feet up off the mat, right? I do not have a good bridge at this time. So turn this way a little bit, maintain that please. While that's happening, I need to make sure that I'm remaining defensively responsible here. That means my hands are up, my elbows are in. I don't want to be allowing them to walk my arms out. We don't want them to allow them to split those frames at all. I got to keep everything in nice and tight. Now, some early ways that I can work on stripping these hooks, let's turn back this way, right, is establishing tension on the ground, right? I need to get my heels down as best as I can. Once I get these heels down, I can ground my legs, and it makes it easier for me to start firing my hamstrings, right? Because it's basically a battle of legs right now. If I can get mine on the ground, my goal is to start straightening my legs out, almost like I'm sitting there in a coffin. You can see how I'm starting to pull my partner's feet back down to the ground. Once I get them close, now it's like I'm scraping them off, right, to try and clear those hooks. If they do it again, He's trying to stop me from bridging. I do the same thing. We got to play this little game and we have to win this little battle. If I start bridging from here, I'm probably not going to get out. I'm probably going to tire myself out and make my life a little bit worse. So win this little battle. Heels to the mat. Extend those legs out. Thinking about you're trying to peel those feet off the mat. Okay? What if that's not being successful? Let's talk about how we can do this with the kipping, right? See, watch what happens. When he hooks onto this and I bridge, look how his hips end up moving with mine, right? So I'm not creating much space because these hooks are just so tight. So I want to make sure I'm keeping my elbows in, my hands on his hips, working his way back. I could even be reverse kind of army crawling, shoulder walking to keep him as low on my hips as possible. That's what I want. Now we're going to use little bridges here. Remember, the hands aren't bench pressing them up, but watch how with my hips and my elbows in tight, I can start to raise him up. Once I have him up, now look, I can drop my hips a little bit and I keep them up there for that brief second, right? Stay up just for that half second so they can see, right? I am using my hips and my arms together to raise him up, right? Then I can be dropping. If I do a bunch of those, right, it's going to help me create even more space. So we start to get unstable, bump, 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 and I'm moving myself around, kind of even sitting up. Once I have this space, and you see how I've gotten them on one knee up, one knee down, now I can scoop myself back underneath them, but I'm making sure that I'm getting my knee through. This is a very important frame. And then I'm going to be sliding my leg over with my toes towards that center line, making sure my shin is below that glute hamstring and I'm hooking the leg as I bring my leg over right here as my foot. So now that way I can keep him away from me. And you can always ask your partner, can you even touch me can you touch my face? So you see how I can manage space very well here from this single leg X position and even continue to create my space to get away. So watch what my legs are doing from this side. In Jiu-Jitsu, we want to start to learn how to use some of our free appendages as well. It's easy for us to get overwhelmed by what's happening in front of us, but I got to remember and just remain calm down here that I'm stripping these grips. I'm getting him down. Now as I'm doing this, right, I'm bumping my hips, moving him around. See how my legs can work together, right, to create that unstable environment. I'm kipping until I can establish that single leg X position, right, making sure that we're prioritizing the connection. So see my foot, I'm hooking right by his glute. I'm bringing my top leg over, toes to the center line, and I don't want this big gap right here, so I'm pinching those knees, right? With my hands, now I can be maintaining good space. If I'm in a sport jiu-jitsu match, we can continue to work our guard, or for self-defense, you're getting up and you're getting out. So one of the last tools that we're gonna talk about today, and I kind of classify this as being like, this would be worst case scenario. Someone is in a smothering style position, right? If you're familiar with a smother called mother's milk that has been out there and recently being used, it can be effective as a way to even, not even just submit an opponent, but drain their energy. It can be extremely exhausting to be stuck underneath somebody. So check out this way for us to try and find this escape. Now, the disclaimer here is this is a little bit of an athletically and mobility inclined escape, right? But I'll show you the backward roll, but also just how to try to just bump that person off of you. You don't even have to be able to do a full backward roll, but as long as we can get our feet in contact with our partner, we can use those to help kind of bump them off. So let's check this out. My opponent has gotten into this full mount position and I was unable to keep him at the length of my frames, meaning he's been picking my elbows up, maybe he's been lifting them up, he's been separating, and watch how as Randy slides his knees up closer to my armpits, he's getting into that more high mount position. So you can see how when he's in that high mount position, my bridging is not very effective at all. I can be bridging as hard as I want right here. It's not really going to do much. And the lower he gets his chest, the worse. So one thing that we got to make sure that we're doing, right, is we can be removing these frames, but I'm going to immediately go thumbs in the armpits. Since he does have my elbows on the outside, we can be okay with starting to straighten our arms out. My goal is now to start sliding my hips back, extending my arms out as far as I possibly can, right? It's really difficult for him to armbar me from here, unless I allow him to get my elbow across his center line. So if I'm being defensively responsible, that means I'm keeping my elbows on the outside and I'm framing him really strong right here. he's not in the best position. Ensuring that I'm looking over my shoulder right here. I want you guys to look at my feet. This is where I'm bringing my knees to my chest, right? If I can get both feet in there, that's going to be great. But this is going to be tough on the mobility. As long as you can kind of get some contact, right? I have a little bit of contact. Now I can work it in there. Whatever shoulder that I'm looking over, that leg wants to start pushing, right? You see I can start pushing with that leg, right? Pushing if he's moving, but I can even bump him onto his hip. I'll slide this way. Let's do that again. Full mount. Partner has gotten past my hands as frames. They've gotten past my elbows as frames. And he's getting low and heavy right here, right? Don't just let them smother your chin and your mouth and nose. Turn your head to the side if you have to. There'll be a little bit of a battle here. You might have to turn your head one way. You may have to turn it the other way. But understand what side you like to roll over best. Straighten the arms out. It's like a little bit of a shimmy down closer to the hips. Since I'm looking over my right shoulder, that's the direction that I want to take them. So I'm bringing my knees together. I can even be more dynamic. I can swing them up to help me get my control. Now I'm pushing, right, to roll him over. And I can even get into a technical stand-up style scenario that I just need to get up and get away from there. So let's look at it one more time. You can even start to strategize with this. You know that training partner is going to go for that full mount. Bump them, get them all the way out, looking over the shoulder. Knees to the chest, hook the feet in there. Once I got him in there, work him into those armpits, right? I got to do this before he's able to posture or pummel, right? The way they're going to try and get out is posture up to try and pummel, right? That's not what we want. So push them over, right? Maintain your space and go and get out of there. That's the backward roll. It can be a little bit more athletically challenging position depending on our mobility, but that's the part of the martial arts behind jiu-jitsu is, you know, even if we can't do this escape now, we work at it a little bit at a time. You get 1% better, and in time, some of these harder, some of these more athletic, tough positions can get easier over time, and that's kind of the purpose in training. While we're in mount, your opponent can be trying to strike with you. They could be trying to submit you. We're going to look at how we can use our opponent's offense of the paintbrush to escape, and also if they're trying to strangle you across the toe choke or even like a rape choke scenario, right? So we're in full mount position right here, okay? And if you notice, like they've probably gotten up a little bit more to like a medium mount position right here. Some early ways that we can kind of try to escape this is placing the feet on the mat and like a little bit of a shoulder walk back to help get those elbows in, right? Let's say that we're a little bit tired for that, right? And we can't. And so he starts to look for that 2-on-1. Sometimes we have to just understand that I want to take his momentum and go with him. Like I know he's trying to pin that arm to the mat, right? So I might make it a little bit difficult as he's pinning it down. That's going to make him really want to finish this. When this elbow is going down to the mat, I got to remember that, right? A lot of his weight and his focus is on this side. So this whole time we've been talking about remain an unstable environment. I want to get his hands to the mat. Right? The best way that I'm going to do that is try to continue to bring his weight over on that side. Now remember, what is his goal here? His goal is to gain 2-on-1 control of this hand to get this paintbrush. It's also known as a double wrist control, also known as a chicken wing or even Americana. It doesn't matter, right? But the way we're going to get out is going to be the same, right? He wants to pick my elbow up, and he wants to drag my hand towards. That's going to get that submission. So I need to make sure that I deny that. I'm going to deny it by in a couple steps, right? I need a powerful bridge. I need to be thinking about this V block, thumb in the armpit. When I bridge, this is going to be pushing really hard. And the last thing that I'm doing is pulling my elbow to the chest. So I'm trying to steal this hand away from him, right? If he's strong here, I'm not strong enough just to pull it out, right? And my bridge isn't strong enough to make him want to post. I'm not strong enough just to push. But if we can do all three simultaneously, it's a whole lot more powerful in getting him out. Right? He posted right there. That means I should combo my shrimping and I can get back to single leg X, or he posts and he's rushing his way back, rushing back. I'm at least getting my knees in and replacing my guard. So trying to get those all simultaneously. Go this side. See what I'm doing right here. As he's dropping that elbow, this thumb is going into that armpit. My feet are flat, knees are open. I'm stealing the grip. So remember, if I create all that space, I got to be ready to try to snap back to my position because they're going to crowd back. I bridge, I make him post, he's crowding, but look, I'm chest escaping, I'm getting my knees up, whether I'm just in a standard kind of guard position, or you find yourself in a more advanced guard like single leg X. Create your space. Make sure that you guys are appropriately taking advantage of all that space that you created. Don't let them settle back down in a mount, because bridging, right, and those explosive movements can be finite, and depending on our age and our athletic level, we may only have so many in the tank. So we got to understand, I got to use this strategically, and the timing's got to be right. So for a choking scenario, right, partners in full mount. If we're in the gi, they have the cross lapel choke, right? Making sure that I'm trying to intercept those grips as early as I possibly can. One thing that I like to do is, like, generally most people, they're not able to get that hand in a really perfect spot right away, but he might sneak that hand in there, and I'm going to be getting my hand up and kind of just cupping, right? So I may not be able to break this grip, but I can stop this grip from advancing. Even if it comes over the top of the other hand, now I can be working on clamping. If I need a stronger clamp to stop the choke, you can come over the top, right? I have my gable grip. My hands are together, just turn 90, no thumbs, right? This can be nice and strong to clamp over those arms, right? Two options. If he does not let go of this grip, I'm going to block his foot. We're going to look in the direction we want to go, and we're going to simply reverse him. Once we're in this position here, I may still have to be focused on defending that choke. It can still be super tight, so I need good posture. My eyes to the sky. I'm finding that top arm, getting the elbow off so that we can break the first grip. And while I'm doing that, then go to the second grip. Remembering, it's a two direction. I'm not just pushing on the arm. My chest is going away. See the slack that I take away when I'm moving my chest away, but I'm also pushing his hand off of me as well. So that would be, they're grabbing onto those material, whether you're wearing a gi, sweatshirt, t-shirt, or whatever. Remember that these grips can get expired. If he holds on to these grips too long, we can reverse the position and grip fight out. If I'm trying to do this and he ends up bailing on that choke, oh, look at that space that I created. I make sure I go straight back into that shrimping position and replacing my guard like we've been doing, both knees in front of us or in a more advanced guard. Now, what if they're going around the neck right here? Right, same thing. If he's all that committed to try and choking me, his weight's probably coming down. I got to be ready with both my arms. I want to find these elbows, and I want to collapse these frames right here, especially if he's pushing down really hard. Collapse the frames, and then start looking at reverse the position. And it is going to be the same no matter what. If they address that bridge to post, take advantage of that space, and get out of that position, whether they're trying to choke your neck directly, cross lapel choke, or you're dealing with that paintbrush, steal those grips away from them, right? Take advantage of that space and get out of that scenario as quick as we can.